The snow didn't just freeze the battlefield. It froze the nerves of every German soldier stationed along the ravaged Belgian line. Dawn hadn't fully broken, yet panic was already spreading through the trenches like wildfire. A young German private, trembling, begged his commander not to raise his head above the sandbags. They're watching, they always watch. The commander scoffed, then stood up anyway, and dropped dead before finishing his first word. No shot was heard, no muzzle flash. Only a lifeless body collapsing into the icy mud. Whispers rippled across the front with terrifying speed. The invisible Canadians are here again. Word traveled from platoon to platoon. These weren't normal marksmen. These shooters didn't miss. They didn't reveal themselves. And most terrifying of all, struck from distances so far, German soldiers believed no human eye could see that far. Officers ordered soldiers to avoid windows, avoid lookout posts, avoid any place where the ghost rifles might be watching. Men covered reflective objects, moved with their heads down, and prayed during patrols. Rumors turned into superstition. Some claimed the Canadians could see heat signatures like wolves. Others swore they used tribal magic, but the story that spread the fastest was the most chilling. The Canadian snipers didn't hunt with bullets, they hunted with fate. Once they saw you, you were already dead. No patrol felt safe. No trench felt deep enough. No helmet felt thick enough. German soldiers began to fear the stillness more than the gunfire, because wherever nothing moved, they were waiting, an invisible enemy, a perfect shot. Legend born from precision so unnatural that even hardened soldiers believed it had to be witchcraft, and this is where their story begins. Before the legend of witchcraft shooters took hold, before German commanders began warning troops to fear the stillness of the forests, the Canadian sniper program was just a quiet experiment, calculated answer to a brutal problem on the Western Front. The Canadians didn't want myth. They wanted survival. Their training didn't begin on the battlefield. It began years earlier in the vast, unforgiving Canadian wilderness, an environment that forged a different type of soldier long before they ever held a military rifle. Many came from the snowy mountains, dense forests, and endless prairies, where hunting wasn't a hobby, it was a way of life. Tracking elk in deep snow, reading the wind across frozen lakes, spotting movement from hundreds of meters away. These weren't skills taught. They were inherited. When the war began, commanders realized something crucial. The habits of wilderness hunters matched perfectly with the demands of precision warfare. So, Canada built a sniper school unlike anything Europe had ever seen. Recruits were not chosen for their strength or aggression. They were chosen for patience, calmness, a rare type of focus. Instructors tested their mental resilience, teaching them to slow their heart rate on command, to fire between breaths, and to hold still for hours without moving even a fingertip. The first rule drilled into their minds: a sniper's rifle is only as accurate as his discipline. Camouflage was not a uniform, it was an art. Snipers crafted their own ghillie suits by hand, stitching in leaves, mud, snow, and moss from the specific terrain they would fight in. A Canadian sniper lying still became indistinguishable from the earth itself. It didn't wait near the enemy, they waited inside the enemy's landscape. Every mission included two men, the shooter and the spotter. Spotter wasn't a sidekick. He was half the brain. He calculated distance, humidity, mirage distortion, wind drift, and bullet drop. The shooter didn't pull the trigger until the spotter's voice confirmed every variable. When the shot landed, neither man reacted. No celebration, no excitement, no movement, and this discipline was tested in real war. While most armies use snipers reactively, Canada used them aggressively, not to scare Koya, but to dismantle the battlefield piece by piece. Koya, they targeted scouts, officers, machine gun crews, radio operators, anyone whose absence would unravel German control. Every kill was a message. The front line has holes you cannot see. To the Germans, this was terror. To the Canadians, it was a chess match. Slow, calculated, technical. The battlefield around them was chaos. Explosions shaking the earth, artillery cratering fields into graveyards of mud, soldiers screaming orders through gas-choked air. But the snipers operated in a separate reality, a silent battlefield that existed through a rifle scope, measured in breaths rather than minutes, where one mistake meant instant death. By the winter of 1944, one thing became clear: Canadian snipers weren't just accurate, they were predictably accurate. The Germans couldn't understand how a shot fired from so far away could hit the exact place. A man's head would appear 1 second before it appeared. That sense of inevitability, that feeling that the Canadians already knew the future, created the myth. Every kill strengthened the fear. Every disappearance strengthened the legend. And what started as a military tactic was about to become the most terrifying rumor on the entire European front. The legend began in the early mornings when fog rolled down valleys like a living thing. German soldiers thought they were safe behind stone walls, in cellars, or crouched among dead vines. But somewhere, just beyond the reach of sight, a Canadian sniper waited. Hours passed, cold seeped into bones. Fingers froze around rifles, breath crystallized in the air. And then, with terrifying inevitability, the first body fell. No warning, no sound, no trace of the shooter. Just death. Sergeant Harold Marshall, one of the men who created that fear. A hunter from the forests of Manitoba, he understood patience like no one else. Before the war, he tracked wolves through winter forests where one misstep could mean starvation or death. In those same forests, he learned that movement betrayed the hunter. Every rustle, every snap, every flicker of light could be a mistake. Now, he applied that knowledge to war. The battlefield was his forest. Every German soldier was his prey. But unlike wolves, they could fight back, and they were trained killers. Mistakes were fatal. Marshall's team was small. Sniper was a master of discipline. They measured wind with the flick of a leaf, judged distances by the shimmer of fog, and waited for the exact moment when the target moved into perfect alignment. One shot, one kill, then vanish. Not because they feared detection, they were ghosts by design, but because the rules of warfare dictated that a sniper's greatest weapon was invisibility. And in this, the Canadians were unmatched. German units began to notice patterns. Officers vanished first. Scouts disappeared while performing routine observations. Communications were disrupted when radio operators fell suddenly, leaving entire sections paralyzed. Men whispered to each other in terror, claiming bullets curved through walls, passed through windows before the shooter appeared. Some muttered about witchcraft, others about demons in the fog. But the truth was simpler and far more terrifying. It's human skill perfected to the point of impossibility. One morning, the Marrow River Valley, Captain Ernst Weber pressed himself against the cold stone walls of a farmhouse. 3 of his men lay dead in ways that defied explanation. Sniper, hidden in the hills, had dispatched them without warning. Weber could see nothing through the fog. No flash, no smoke, nothing. Yet the deaths were real. His men refused to leave the basement. Young Private Schneider whispered a single word over and over: X-ray. Witchcraft. Weber wanted to call him mad, but deep down he wondered if the boy was right. How else could such precise deaths occur under impossible conditions? Meanwhile, across the valley, Marshall lay in his camouflaged position for 6 hours. The cold didn't matter, time didn't matter, movement didn't matter. Only the perfect shot mattered. He knew the German officer would appear for a brief moment at the window. He exhaled, settled his heartbeat, calculated windage, and squeezed the trigger. The officer dropped. No sound, no warning, only death. Marshall was already moving, sliding backward through frozen vines, disappearing into the terrain as if he had never existed. One shot, one kill. The myth began. The Germans did not yet know the full scale of the threat, but the seeds of terror were planted. Every encounter reinforced the legend. Every precise kill spread the whisper. Canadian snipers strike from nowhere, and their bullets are guided by forces beyond comprehension. And as the fog thickened over the valley, the Canadians waited, ready to repeat the impossible. The tension reached its peak during one fateful morning in the Marrow River Valley. German officers had begun rotating their most experienced men to the observation posts, desperate to find the source of the deadly precision that had decimated their ranks. Captain Weber, a veteran of countless battles, now found himself paralyzed by a fear he could not name. 3 of his best men had fallen without a sound. Every decision felt like a gamble with death. One wrong glance, one careless move, and it would be his turn. Across the valley, Sergeant Harold Marshall waited, invisible in the shallow depression among rocks and dead vines. Hours had passed, the cold numbing his limbs, yet his mind remained razor-sharp. He had been trained for this. Every lesson from the Canadian wilderness, from patience in hunting wolves to reading the subtlest signs of wind and fog, culminated in this precise moment. This was not luck. It was methodical calculation, honed to perfection. All he needed. Slowly, deliberately, he began retreating, melting into the terrain like a shadow. Every movement was calculated, every exposure minimized. Behind him, Private Tommy Chen followed, carrying their equipment with quiet efficiency. No noise, no trace, just silence. To the Germans, it would be as if death itself had walked among them, unseen and unstoppable. Back at the forward command post, Marshall logged the shot with meticulous detail. Distance 780 meters. Conditions foggy with light northwest wind. Target enemy officer. Time 6 hours 12 minutes. Every kill was documented not just as a record, but as a lesson, a blueprint for terror. Precision was not enough. Replication and teaching ensured that fear could spread across the front, making every German soldier question the safety of their own shadow. Meanwhile, the Germans' panic escalated. Troops refused to man observation posts. Patrols were delayed or canceled. Officers argued over impossible calculations, convinced that the Canadians were either supernatural or in league with something unholy. The legend of the invisible sniper began to take hold, spreading faster than any official report ever could. The fog, the cold, the silence, all conspired to create the perfect environment for fear to flourish. This single operation encapsulated the new face of warfare. One man armed with patience, precision, and discipline, reshaping the battlefield. The Germans could not respond, could not adapt fast enough. Their every instinct, every training, every expectation of combat was being undermined by a single invisible adversary. Marshall and his team weren't just killing soldiers. They were rewriting the rules of fear itself. And in that valley, in the cold dawn fog, the myth became reality. The Canadian snipers were unstoppable, untouchable, and terrifyingly human. Germans could feel it before they saw it. The silence in the valley wasn't just quiet. It was oppressive, like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. Officers scoured maps, rearranged squads, and debated tactics, but nothing worked. Patrols moved slowly, heads down, hands clenching rifles as if sheer will could protect them from the invisible threat. Every soldier, veteran, or recruit carried a shared dread. The Canadian snipers were watching. Whispers of witchcraft spread faster than orders. Some claimed that a single bullet could track a man's heartbeat. Others swore the Canadians could see in complete darkness, bending reality with nothing more than steel and glass. Tire units refused to leave buildings without cover. Observation. Posts were abandoned. Soldiers went to extreme lengths to avoid exposure, even in areas where no sniper could possibly see. The legend had grown beyond the battlefield and entered the minds of every German in the sector, and the Canadians played their part in fostering it, though unintentionally. Marshall's sniper teams did not advertise their presence. They moved silently through snow and fog, appearing only in the periphery of vision, executing single, perfectly calculated shots and then vanishing. Every mission reinforced the myth. The Germans began interpreting every shadow, every rustling branch, as a possible threat. Even the sound of the wind made them flinch. Fear had become a weapon more lethal than bullets. Canadian snipers were not just precise, they were patient. To a degree that defied understanding. Hours, sometimes days, passed without movement. It became part of the landscape. Rocks, vines, fog, all were extensions of the snipers' bodies. A single movement could ruin a perfect shot, yet it was never rushed. The German soldiers didn't know whether the snipers were present or if they were imagining them. That uncertainty was the key. Fear thrives not on what is seen, but on what is expected and unseen. German reports began to reflect this psychological toll. Discipline faltered. Requests for transfers surged. Units requested relief from sectors dominated by Canadian marksmen. Even officers confessed privately that they could not explain the deaths, men dying from impossible distances with no visible source. Commanders implemented additional counter-sniper teams, but they were ineffective. The Canadians' patience and precision could not be matched by aggressive, reactive measures. Every patrol became a test of nerve. Soldiers hesitated to peek over walls, to check windows, to cross open fields. They moved only when necessary, retracing steps, second-guessing every decision. The psychological grip of the Canadian snipers was absolute. Marshall's philosophy, one shot, one kill, then vanish, had transformed individual skill into a strategic advantage. Fear itself became a calculated part of warfare. By the time evening fell, German officers were exhausted not by battle, but by uncertainty. Every corner of the valley, every shadow of fog, felt alive. Every movement was suspicious. Orders were delayed as commanders hesitated, unsure if the next step would end in death. And somewhere in the fog, Marshall's team continued their silent vigil. They were invisible. They were patient. And they were changing the course of the war, one terrifying shot at a time. The legend had taken hold. The Germans no longer just feared Canadian soldiers. They feared the impossible. And the fog of Italy had become a crucible of terror, where invisible hunters redefined what it meant to fight by late 1943. The impact of the Canadian sniper program had begun to reshape entire sectors of the Italian front. German officers reported unnerving trends, patrols were reduced, observation posts abandoned, and troops increasingly reluctant to move, even in supposedly secure areas. The fear was pervasive, a psychological contagion that spread faster than bullets ever could. Every soldier knew that at any moment, in any fog-filled valley or shattered village, a single invisible shooter could strike with deadly precision. Marshall and his team became architects of this unseen terror. Every mission was meticulously planned, distances measured, wind calculated, trajectories mapped. They documented every shot in painstaking detail. The type of ammunition, powder charge, weather conditions, time, and target behavior. This wasn't mere record keeping. It was science applied to fear, a methodical study that allowed every sniper to replicate success with terrifying accuracy. Precision became a doctrine, patience its weapon, invisibility its strategy. The results spoke louder than reports or rumors. German casualties in Canadian sectors skyrocketed compared to adjacent fronts. Officers and key personnel were disproportionately affected, creating gaps in command that disrupted enemy coordination. Entire units hesitated or refused to advance, without confirmation that Canadian snipers were not waiting in concealment. One captured lieutenant admitted that his company feared even the smallest movements. They would not expose themselves to windows, fields, or roads. The psychological toll was immense, and it functioned as a force multiplier. Marshall's team didn't need numbers. Fear did the killing for them. At the Battle of Ortona in December 1943, the doctrine proved decisive. Narrow streets and dense stone buildings made traditional assaults costly. 3 sniper teams positioned in a single church bell tower controlled the entire square. German soldiers attempting to move were picked off with surgical precision. Any officer daring to peer from a window fell. The town became a trap, not because of sheer firepower, but because fear immobilized the enemy. Soldiers whispered about invisible bullets and impossible shots. They believed Canadian snipers were beyond human, even supernatural. The myth became as real as the casualties themselves. Canadian leadership recognized the value beyond the battlefield. Lieutenant General Guy Simons authorized expansion of sniper sections, providing them with modified Ross rifles, priority ammunition, and handpicked men who understood patience and discipline. These snipers trained others, spreading the doctrine. Across every battalion, soon, entire fronts were dominated not just by superior marksmanship, but by psychological warfare that shaped enemy behavior. Fear had become a weapon as precise as any rifle. Marshall and his men didn't seek glory. Their goal was effective, disciplined, surgical impact, by using patience and precision to create a landscape of constant threat. They forced the enemy into submission without direct engagement. Entire strategies and battle plans were altered because one sniper, lying motionless for hours in a valley or behind a stone wall, could control the movements of dozens of soldiers. The battlefield had changed. Warfare would never be the same. The foggy hills of Italy became a proving ground for what would later be considered a revolutionary approach to modern warfare. By the winter of 1944, German soldiers had begun whispering the impossible. Canadian snipers could kill from distances where a bullet shouldn't reach. Rumors of witchcraft spread, fueled by the silence that followed each kill. Entire squads refused to advance, paralyzed by fear of unseen marksmen. One morning near the town of Ortona, the full power of the sniper program became undeniable. German troops were attempting to evacuate a forward position across a frozen valley, unaware that a single sniper team had taken position among the rocks above. Sergeant Marshall, flanked by Private Chen and another veteran marksman, surveyed the terrain with a predator's patience. The fog was thick, drifting like smoke through the valley, limiting visibility to barely a few meters. Every movement could be fatal, every heartbeat counted. Then they appeared. An officer stepped from cover, scanning the area, unaware that his fate was already sealed. Marshall exhaled slowly, calculating the precise distance, adjusting for wind drift, and waiting for the slightest motion that would give him a perfect shot. The fog swirled, twisting light and shadow across the officer's figure. It was a near impossible. Shot one that would have daunted any ordinary marksman. But for Marshall, it was a culmination of years of wilderness hunting, battlefield experience, and rigorous practice. One trigger pull, the officer dropped without a sound. The Germans were stunned. Fear rippled through their ranks. Minutes later, another officer appeared, peeking over a stone wall, trying to coordinate movement. Marshall adjusted for a new variable, the shifting wind that could push the bullet several feet off course. Mind worked like a machine, anticipating trajectory, distance, and timing. One shot. Another German officer fell, this one at nearly 800 meters, through fog, through air, so cold it shimmered and distorted vision. Chaos erupted. The soldiers froze, certain that death could arrive from anywhere, at any moment. The psychological impact was immediate. German units retreated to basements, cellars, and stone buildings, unwilling to expose themselves to the invisible threat. Orders were delayed, communication lines faltered, and movements slowed to a crawl. Entire plans were abandoned simply because one sniper team controlled the perception of the battlefield. The Canadians had learned that killing soldiers was one thing. Controlling the mind of the enemy was far more powerful. This was the true climax of Marshall's campaign. Fear itself had become a weapon. Every shot, every patient hour spent lying in cold and mud, every minute spent observing the enemy, reinforced the narrative that the Germans couldn't counter. The invisible snipers were everywhere, and yet they were nowhere. Every misty morning, every shadow in the valley could hide them. And every German soldier knew it. They didn't just fear being shot, they feared the unknown. They feared the inevitability of death at the hands of someone they could never see, never hear, and never fight back against. By the end of the day, the valley had fallen silent again. Marshall and his team had vanished as they always did, leaving only the German dead behind. The legend of the Canadian snipers grew with each passing hour, whispered from trench to trench, spreading faster than any formal report. It was no longer about skill alone. It was about creating an enemy that questioned reality itself. And in this, the Canadians had mastered what many armies could not, turning patience, discipline, and precision into a weapon more effective than what? Any artillery barrage. The legend of the Canadian snipers did not fade with a single battle. Instead, it grew, spreading across the Italian front like wildfire, carried by whispers, captured intelligence reports, and terrified German soldiers. Every new unit arriving at the front was briefed not just on terrain and tactics, but on the invisible threat that awaited them. They were told to expect the impossible, men who could strike from distances beyond comprehension, who vanished like shadows, who struck without warning. And the German soldiers believed it. Fear had become institutionalized. Officers found themselves unable to enforce orders as troops hesitated to move in open fields, check windows, or leave buildings without cover. Patrols were reduced, reconnaissance delayed, and every action scrutinized for danger that might not even exist. The Canadians had turned patience into a weapon and invisibility into a doctrine. It's no longer about how many bullets they could fire, but how effectively they could control the enemy's mind. In one instance, near the village of Casino, a German company was pinned inside a farmhouse for 2 days by a single sniper they never saw. Sergeant Marshall had calculated every detail, distance, elevation, wind, and timing. The company's sergeant fell first, then a radio operator, then a corporal, all in moments that seemed impossible. The survivors refused to move, certain that the sniper was omnipresent, when Canadian infantry finally advanced behind the cover of artillery. The Germans surrendered without resistance. No conventional firepower had broken them, only fear, cultivated by precision and patience. Canadian sniper teams documented every kill with military precision. Each shot was logged with exact conditions: distance, wind, weather, target behavior. They created a body of knowledge that could be taught, replicated, and expanded. Younger recruits trained under Marshall and Wallace learned that success was never immediate, never aggressive. The doctrine was clear: wait, calculate, strike once, then vanish. Even the Germans' attempts at counter-sniping failed. Their aggression and impatience made them predictable. Every mistake revealed them to the patient Canadian marksmen who, struck with surgical certainty, by the spring of 1944, the myth had solidified into history. German intelligence reports labeled the phenomenon as an anomaly, impossible to explain. Officer casualties in Canadian sectors were drastically higher than in areas facing British or American troops. Soldiers refused to leave shelters, patrols were half strength, and rumors of supernatural skill permeated the ranks. The fear of invisible killers became a strategic advantage, one that the Canadians wielded with ruthless efficiency. The battlefield itself had been reshaped by psychological warfare. Long before any conventional assault, every soldier who faced a Canadian sniper carried the fear forward. New recruits arrived already terrified, having heard stories from veterans. The legend multiplied with each retelling: bullets that could curve, men who could vanish into thin air, rifles that struck without sound. Yet the truth was simpler and more frightening. It was human skill perfected to a level that seemed impossible. Infinite patience, unmatched precision, and complete control over one's own presence and environment. The Germans faced, not magic, but a terrifying mastery of craft that defied their expectations. And so, the valley, the fog, the frozen hills became the proving ground for a new reality in warfare. One man, perfectly trained, could alter the minds of dozens, even hundreds. Fear was now a weapon as precise and deadly as any rifle. Every movement the enemy made was calculated against the invisible threat. Every misstep could be fatal. The myth had become history, but the strategy, the patient, deadly, invisible sniper, was now embedded in the future of war. By the time Canadian forces moved from Italy to the beaches of Normandy in 1944, the sniper, doctrine pioneered by Marshall and Wallace, had already become legendary. German units, aware of what awaited them, approached Canadian sectors with dread and caution. Officers requested extra counter-snipers, reinforced observation posts, and even altered entire attack plans. But the psychological advantage had already shifted decisively. The battlefield was no longer just about firepower, it was about fear, patience, and the ability to remain unseen. Canadian snipers continued to operate under the same guiding principles. Okay, one shot, one kill, then vanish. Every kill was logged with meticulous detail. Every shot, a combination of calculation, environmental awareness, and practiced instinct. Marshall's methods had transformed small sniper teams into force multipliers, capable of controlling entire zones without traditional assaults. The enemy's hesitation and paranoia allowed Canadian infantry and artillery to advance with reduced casualties, while German soldiers moved like trapped prey in a landscape they no longer trusted. During the Normandy campaign, soldiers like Corporal James Wallace demonstrated that the lessons from Italy were universal. Wallace could spot an enemy artillery observer perched in a church steeple nearly a kilometer away and neutralize him without alerting a single nearby soldier. German counter-snipers were deployed to respond, but their impatience and conventional tactics made them predictable. Within hours, they were located and eliminated. The one-shot, one-kill philosophy had created a battlefield where the first to reveal themselves died. And the Canadians dictated the pace and psychology of combat. The impact went beyond immediate tactical victories. German intelligence reports documented unusual behavior in troops facing Canadian sectors. Officers were killed at disproportionate rates. Soldiers wore helmets constantly, even in supposedly safe rear areas, and reconnaissance patrols dropped sharply in frequency. Fear had become a self-reinforcing cycle, spreading from veteran to recruit, from one battalion to another. The Canadians had not only mastered marksmanship, they had weaponized human psychology. Lessons from Italy and Normandy were codified and later shared with Allied forces. British and American militaries studied Marshall's sniper logs, trained instructors in patient targeting, and adopted the one-shot, one-kill doctrine. The Canadian approach became the blueprint for modern sniper operations worldwide. Absolute patience, meticulous preparation, invisibility, and precise execution. It was a doctrine that proved lethal, not just through physical skill, but through the manipulation of perception and fear. The soldiers themselves rarely sought recognition. Marshall returned to Manitoba after the war, quietly resuming life as a hunting guide, burning his logbook to protect the secrets of his craft. Wallace stayed in the military, teaching the patient sniper doctrine to generations of soldiers. Their work ensured that even decades later, the principles of Canadian sniping remained at the core of modern military training. The effectiveness of their method demonstrated that warfare was not always won by volume of fire or brute force. Sometimes, it was won by those who could control the battlefield without being seen. Ultimately, the Canadian snipers reshaped the understanding of combat. They proved that a single, highly trained individual, equipped with patience, skill, and discipline, could dominate a battlefield and instilled terror far beyond the reach of any conventional weapon. Fear, precision, and invisibility had become more potent than machine guns or artillery. And as soldiers across Europe would quietly attest, there was nothing more terrifying than the knowledge that death could strike from nowhere, and you could never know exactly where it was coming from. By the end of the war, in May 1945, the legend of Canadian snipers had become reality. German soldiers who had survived engagements against them carried memories of impossible shots, vanishing marksmen, and an ever-present fear that nothing could explain. The psychological toll endured by the Wehrmacht outlasted the battles themselves. Entire units had adapted their behavior out of terror, avoiding open fields, abandoning windows, moving only when darkness or fog concealed them. The ghosts of Italy and Normandy lingered in their minds long after surrender. Harold Marshall returned to a quiet life in Manitoba, never boasting of the lives he had taken or the tactics he had perfected. His war had ended, but the doctrine he created endured. James Wallace continued in the Canadian Army, training new generations, spreading the patient sniper philosophy to Korea, Vietnam, and conflicts around the globe. The one-shot, one-kill doctrine became the foundation of modern sniper operations, transforming warfare forever. The Germans' whispers of witchcraft, of bullets guided by unseen forces, were revealed in time to be the simple, terrifying mastery of human skill? The fear they experienced was real, but it came not from magic, machines, or trickery. It came from men who had honed patience, precision, and invisibility to perfection. Marshall and Wallace had shown that the deadliest weapon in war might not be firepower, tanks, or planes, but a single human mind, disciplined, focused, and patient. Even decades later, historians and military strategists study the Italian valleys, Normandy fields to understand how a few men reshaped modern combat. The psychological dominance achieved by the Canadian snipers stands as a testament. Fear, when engineered with skill, can be as decisive as any battle. In the end, the Germans were not defeated by numbers alone, but by the unseen, relentless mastery of men who made patience a weapon, precision a rule, and invisibility the ultimate advantage. The ghosts of the Canadian snipers became immortal. It's not in myth, but in the very doctrine of warfare itself.